I used to think I had it all figured out. My life was a series of achievements, career milestones, social circles, and meticulously crafted online profiles. I'd built a version of myself that seemed to impress everyone around me. Yet, despite the accolades and the fleeting validation from others, something gnawed at me from within. Then, life pulled the rug out from under me. My father, me stern, distant father, passed away unexpectedly. I thought I'd be prepared for it. We weren't that close after all. But when I stood in his quiet, untouched study, sifting through his old things, I felt something crack open inside me. It wasn't grief in the traditional sense. It was more like a realization, a deep, unsettling awareness that my life was built on noise. I found a small, leather-bound notebook tucked away on his desk. Its edges were worn, its pages filled with faded handwriting. Inside the cover was a single quote that stopped me cold. "The breeze at dawn has secrets to tell you. Don't go back to sleep." It was a quote from Rumi. My father, a man who rarely spoke of emotions, let alone philosophy, had kept this close. I traced the words with my fingertips, wondering why this simple line had meant so much to him. For the first time in years, I felt genuinely curious about something other than my own success. That night, I couldn't sleep. My mind kept replaying that quote, wondering what secrets I had been ignoring. My life, as it stood, was a performance, a series of roles I played to fit in. But beyond those roles, who was I? In a moment of clarity, or maybe desperation, I made a decision. I would go to my father's cabin. It was a place I'd always avoided, a symbol of his solitude that I never understood. Now, it felt like the only place where I could confront whatever was clawing at my soul. The next morning, I packed a few essentials, just clothes, some books, and that notebook. As I drove out of the city, leaving behind the towering glass buildings and the endless traffic, I felt a strange mix of fear and relief. The further I got from the noise, the more I wondered if I was making a mistake. Was I really ready to face myself without distraction? When I finally arrived at the cabin, I stood at the doorstep for a long moment. It was quiet, almost oppressively so. The wind rustled through the trees, and the sound was both soothing and intimidating. I pushed open the creaky door and stepped inside. Dust motes danced in the sunlight filtering through the small windows. The place was exactly as I remembered, drugged, simple, and profoundly empty. Setting my bag down, I took a deep breath, trying to shake off the feeling of unease. I was alone for the first time in years, completely alone. No phone buzzing, no meetings, no one to impress. Just me. I tried to distract myself by unpacking, but the silence pressed in on me like a weight. I felt exposed, like I'd shed a protective layer I didn't even know I had. That night, I couldn't sleep. My mind raced, filled with memories of my father, moments when he seemed lost in his own thoughts, quiet mornings when he'd sit on the porch, staring out at the lake. Back then, I thought he was just brooding, shutting himself off from the world. Now, I wondered if he was searching for something I was only beginning to grasp. I picked up the notebook again, flipping through pages filled with fragments of poetry and reflections. One passage caught my eye. "In solitude, I remember who I am. In noise, I forget." I couldn't deny it. I'd been drowning myself in noise for years. Work, parties, endless social media scrolling. It was all just a way to avoid the silence. But now, sitting alone in the cabin, I couldn't escape it. The silence was relentless, like it was daring me to face whatever I'd been running from. By the third day, the silence became almost unbearable. I wanted to turn on the radio, call a friend, do anything to fill the space. But I knew that would defeat the purpose. I wasn't here to escape, I was here to confront. So, I stayed. I let the unease simmer, refusing to run. One evening, as the sun dipped below the trees, I sat by the lake, feeling the chill settle over the water. I didn't force any thoughts. I just sat there, breathing, listening to the world around me. Slowly, I felt a shift, a sense of calm seeping into my bones. It wasn't comfort exactly, more like acceptance. I didn't need to figure everything out right now. I just needed to be present. The more I sat with that feeling, the more I realized that solitude wasn't my enemy. It was the doorway to something deeper. I thought about my father again, how I had judged him for his silence, assuming it meant indifference. Maybe he wasn't shutting me out. Maybe he was just trying to find himself. I couldn't help but feel a pang of regret. I'd always blamed him for being distant, but maybe I had never tried to understand him. In that stillness, I felt the weight of my own judgments. I knew I needed to let go not just of my resentment, but of the illusion that I'd ever truly understood him. That night, I wrote in the notebook. I didn't try to sound wise or insightful. I just wrote the truth. I've been scared of silence because it strips away everything I've used to define myself. But maybe that's the point. Maybe in losing those definitions, I'll finally find out who I am. I closed the notebook feeling lighter than I had in years. I didn't have all the answers, far from it. But for the first time, I didn't feel the need to fill the silence with anything but myself. The next morning, I woke up early. I sat on the porch, just like my father used to, and watched the sun rise over the lake. The air was crisp, and the world felt vast and untouched. As the light broke through the trees, I felt something shift within me, a quiet resolve. I didn't need to rush back to the noise. I didn't need to prove anything to anyone. For the first time, solitude didn't feel like loneliness. It felt like a reunion with myself, with the parts of me I'd forgotten. I knew then that the cabin wasn't just my father's refuge, it was mine too. A place to confront, to reflect, and to remember. And as I sat there, breathing in the morning air, I whispered to myself, "The breeze at dawn has secrets to tell you. Don't go back to sleep." In that moment, I knew I was finally awake. The silence was relentless. It wrapped around me, pressing inward, reminding me just how unaccustomed I was to stillness. At first, I tried to drown it out. I moved around the cabin, cleaning, rearranging furniture, anything to keep my mind occupied. But once I'd exhausted every excuse to stay busy, the quiet settled back, unyielding and unapologetic. I sat on the old leather armchair by the window, trying to read one of the books I'd brought. My eyes skimmed the pages, but nothing stuck. My thoughts wandered back to my father. I'd always considered him emotionally distant, someone who chose solitude over family. Growing up, I couldn't understand why he would retreat to this cabin for weeks on end, leaving my mother and me behind. I used to think he was running away from responsibility, from us. But now, sitting alone in the space he once occupied, I wondered if maybe I had judged him too harshly. Maybe he wasn't running away. Maybe he was looking for something I was just beginning to grasp. That night, sleep didn't come easily. I lay in bed, my mind buzzing with fragmented memories. I could see my father on the porch, sipping coffee, his gaze fixed on the lake. Back then, I thought he was just hiding from life. Now, I wondered if he had been trying to make sense of it. I turned over. I wasn't just dealing with his absence, I was dealing with the weight of my own misconceptions. The next morning, I woke up to the sound of birds chirping outside. I got up, brewed a cup of coffee, and took it out to the porch. The air was crisp, and the lake looked like a sheet of glass. I sat there, breathing in the morning, trying to find some semblance of peace. I pulled out my father's notebook again, flipping to a random page. One entry caught my eye. Sometimes I wonder if solitude is a curse or a gift. Perhaps it's both. It strips away the noise and leaves you with yourself. Only then can you know what truly needs healing. Reading those words made my chest tighten. Had my father been struggling too? Had he also felt overwhelmed by the life he'd built? I couldn't help but feel a pang of guilt. I had spent so much time blaming him for not being present, but maybe he had been grappling with demons I never took the time to understand. For the next few days, I made it a point to sit by the lake every morning. I didn't force any revelations. I just allowed myself to be present. At first, it was maddening. My mind kept spinning with questions and regrets. But gradually, the chaos inside me started to settle, like sediment sinking to the bottom of a pond. One evening, as I watched the sun dip behind the tree line, I found myself whispering into the empty air, "Dad, were you really that distant? Or was I just too angry to see you?" The question hung there, unanswered. But asking it out loud made me realize something. I had been carrying resentment without ever confronting its roots. I had blamed my father for being absent, but maybe I had also been absent from understanding his struggles, absent from acknowledging his humanity. The realization hit hard. My father wasn't some unfeeling figure. He was a man trying to cope the only way he knew how. That night, I couldn't sleep. My mind kept replaying the few moments when my father had tried to reach out a quiet word of encouragement before a big test, a rare pat on the shoulder after I landed my first job. They were small gestures, easily dismissed at the time, but now I saw them differently. He had tried, in his own quiet way, to show he cared. The next day, I went through the old photo albums stacked in the corner of the cabin. Pictures from family vacations, birthday parties, quiet Sunday mornings. There was one photo of my father and me fishing by the lake. I must have been about 7, grinning as I held up a tiny fish, my dad beside me, his hand resting on my shoulder. I remembered that day how proud he seemed, even though I had barely caught anything. I had forgotten that moment, forgotten that sometimes he did show his pride, his affection, even if it wasn't in the loud, obvious ways I had wanted. I looked at the photo, tracing the outlines with my thumb. I had been so caught up in what he wasn't that I failed to see what he was. It was humbling to realize that maybe the distance I'd felt wasn't just his doing. Maybe I had built a wall fortified by my own expectations and hurt. That evening, I wrote in the notebook again, "Silence is uncomfortable because it forces you to see not just others but yourself. It strips away the stories you tell to protect your ego and leaves you with the truth." And the truth is, I never really knew him. Maybe I didn't want to. As I closed the notebook, I felt a shift, a small but profound one. I wasn't ready to forgive completely, not yet. But I was ready to understand. I went down to the lake and skipped stones across the water, letting my mind drift. A thought surfaced. Maybe solitude wasn't about finding answers, but about making peace with the questions. I sat on the dock until the sky turned dark, the stars blinking to life one by one. In that quiet, I felt a sense of presence, a stillness that didn't demand anything from me. It just was. Maybe that's what my father had been seeking all along, a place where he could just be, without expectations or judgment. When I went back inside, I picked up the notebook one last time for the night. Flipping to the back, I found another entry. "We are all searching for something that doesn't make sense until we let go of trying to make sense of it." Those words stayed with me long after I put the notebook down. Maybe I had been so focused on defining my father's legacy that I missed the essence of his journey. And maybe, just maybe, by accepting his struggle, I could start accepting my own. That night, I slept soundly for the first time since arriving at the cabin. I didn't dream of achievements or failures, just stillness, a quiet place where I didn't have to prove anything. For once, that was enough. The days at the cabin stretched long and quiet. I had settled into a routine morning coffee by the lake, long walks through the woods, evenings flipping through my father's notebook. Yet, despite the rhythm I'd created, a restlessness grew inside me. It was as if the silence itself had shifted from something I endured to something that demanded my full attention. One evening, as I was cooking dinner, I heard a noise outside. Just the wind, I told myself, but my pulse quickened. I went to the window, half expecting to see someone standing there. But it was just the trees swaying, their shadows stretching across the ground. I let out a breath I didn't know I'd been holding. That was the thing about solitude, it made every sound feel significant, every moment feel like it carried weight. Back in the city, my days blurred together, meetings, deadlines, plans. But here, in the cabin, time moved differently. It forced me to feel, to notice, to confront. I sat back down at the table, my father's notebook open beside me. I had gotten used to flipping through its pages whenever I felt uneasy. This time, a line caught my eye. "The hardest battles are not fought in the world but within the soul. Facing oneself is the greatest act of courage." I closed my eyes, letting those words sink in. Was that what I had been avoiding all these years, facing myself? I had built my life around distraction, constantly moving, achieving, never stopping long enough to examine the hollow feeling inside. That night, the dreams came. vivid, unsettling dreams of my father silent, watching me from across the lake. In one, he was younger, as I remembered him from my childhood. He was building something on the porch, his hands moving with purpose. I called out to him, but he didn't look up. When I walked closer, I saw that he was working on a small wooden box, carving intricate patterns into its sides. I woke up drenched in sweat, my heart pounding. I couldn't shake the feeling that the dream was more than just a memory, it was a message. I got up, pulled on my jacket, and went outside. The night air was cool, and the sky was clear, stars scattered across the darkness. I sat on the steps of the porch, trying to calm my racing thoughts. The dream stirred something painful, a realization that I had been trying to bury. I wasn't just angry at my father for being distant. I was angry at myself for not trying harder to understand him. Maybe I had resented him not because he was absent, but because he reminded me of the parts of myself I didn't want to face, my own tendency to retreat, to shut down, to keep people at arm's length. I took a walk to the lake, the ground cold under my bare feet. I thought about that wooden box from the dream. Why had my mind conjured that? I remembered how my father used to carve small trinkets, little animals, simple boxes. He never explained why he made them. I always thought it was just a way to pass time, a hobby. But now I wondered if it was more a way to focus his thoughts, to shape something tangible when life felt unformed. I sat on the dock, letting my feet dangle above the water. The moonlight reflected off the surface, rippling with the breeze. I thought about how easy it was to blame him when I didn't understand. It was easier to label him as cold rather than admit that I had never tried to reach him. I realized that my father's way of coping with his pain wasn't any less valid just because it wasn't my way. That's the thing about solitude, it strips away the stories you tell yourself to justify your anger. I had convinced myself that my father's silence was a rejection, but maybe it was just his way of surviving. As the night wore on, I felt a strange calm settle over me. The cabin looked almost peaceful from where I sat, a silhouette against the vast sky. I thought about going back inside, but something made me stay a while longer, just breathing in the night air. I remembered another line from the notebook. Silence teaches you to listen not just to the world, but to yourself. I had been so busy blaming my father for not speaking that I never listened to what his silence might have been saying. He had been hurting too, maybe in ways I never considered. I decided to honor that understanding. I picked up a smooth stone from the edge of the dock and tossed it into the lake, watching the ripples spread outward. I thought about how much I had resisted solitude, how much I had feared facing my own thoughts. But now, in this quiet place, I started to see it differently. Solitude wasn't lonely. Nesset was a mirror. And looking into it meant seeing not just the parts I liked, but the parts I'd kept hidden. I stayed by the lake until the first hints of dawn. Back inside the cabin, I noticed something on the shelf above the fireplace, a small wooden box. My heart pounded as I took it down, dusted it off, and opened it. Inside was a folded piece of paper. Unfolding it carefully, I saw my father's handwriting. To understand yourself, you must first forgive yourself. Only then can you forgive others. I held the note for a long time, trying to process the weight of those words. Had he known I would find this one day? Or had he written it for himself, a reminder to keep pushing through his own struggles? Sitting there in the quiet morning light, I felt something shift inside me. I hadn't forgiven myself for the anger I'd carried. I had judged my father for seeking solitude, but hadn't I done the same? Wasn't I here because I needed space to make sense of my own life? In that realization, I felt a strange lightness, as if a knot I hadn't known existed had started to loosen. I sat back on the armchair, holding the wooden box, and whispered, "Dad, I'm trying to understand. I really am." It wasn't an apology yet, I wasn't ready for that. But it was a step, a small but important step. That night, sleep came easier. Not because I had figured everything out, but because I had stopped demanding answers. I let myself rest, knowing that understanding would come in pieces, not all at once. I dreamt of the lake again, but this time my father wasn't on the other side. He was sitting next to me, quiet, just being there. When I woke up, I didn't feel the same dread I had felt before. The cabin felt less like a place of isolation and more like a space for growth. I wasn't running anymore. I was staying. I was facing it. For the first time in a long while, I didn't feel alone. The next morning, I woke up feeling strangely lighter, as if I had let go of something heavy without even realizing it. I stayed in bed for a while, just listening to the quiet hum of the cabin, the soft rustling of the wind outside. There was no rush, no deadlines, no pressure to perform, just me in this quiet space. As I lay there, I thought about that note I found in the wooden box. To understand yourself, you must first forgive yourself. Only then can you forgive others. End of free. It was like my father had known that someday I would come here, seeking answers. The thought made me feel closer to him than I had in years. Maybe he understood my struggle because it had been his struggle too. I got up, brewed a cup of coffee, and sat on the porch, watching the mist lift from the lake. My thoughts weren't racing like before. They were slower, more deliberate. I didn't feel the need to distract myself. I could just be. That realization hit me with a quiet, unexpected force. I was allowing myself to just exist. No mask, no expectations. Just me, as I was. I wondered if this was what my father had been seeking when he came out here. Not an escape, but a return to himself. I spent the next few hours cleaning up the cabin, dusting the shelves, sweeping the floors, folding the old quilt on the armchair. It wasn't just about tidying up. It felt like reclaiming the space, making it mine. As I worked, I found small remnants of my father's life here books, with dog-eared pages, fishing gear, neatly stored by the door, a half-carved wooden figure left unfinished on the workbench. One of the books caught my attention, a collection of Rumi's poetry. I flipped through it, and a passage jumped out. "The wound is the place where the light enters you." I sat down, holding the book in my hands, letting those words sink in. The wound me father's absence, my resentment. My own guilt wasn't just pain, it was a doorway. Maybe solitude was showing me that healing didn't mean erasing the hurt. It meant understanding it, letting it become a part of who I was without letting it control me. As I sat there, the quiet seemed differentless, intimidating, more like an invitation. I thought about the last few days show I had fought against being alone, how I had resisted facing myself. Now, I felt ready to lean into it. I realized that being alone didn't mean being lonely. It meant being with myself, without pretense. I took a walk down to the lake, the path familiar now, like it had claimed me as part of the landscape. I stood by the water, watching the gentle ripples, and thought about my father's presence here. He wasn't a man of many words, but maybe he didn't need to be. His silence wasn't an absence. It was a space where he could be honest with himself. I remembered a moment from when I was a teenager, one of the few times he tried to talk to me about life. I had just failed my first driving test, and I was furious at myself, at the instructor, at the whole world. My dad had come into my room, sat on the edge of the bed, and simply said, "It's okay to be frustrated, just don't get stuck there. Learn from it. Move forward." At the time, I had rolled my eyes, convinced he didn't understand how I felt. But now, thinking back, I saw it differently. He wasn't dismissing my feelings. He was trying to teach me that resilience wasn't about suppressing emotions but moving through them. That was the essence of what I was beginning to understand here. At the cabin, resilience wasn't about being invincible. It was about acknowledging the cracks and still choosing to keep going. As the afternoon sun dipped low, I sat back on the porch, the Rumi book still in my hands. I wondered how many evenings my father had spent like this, quietly reflecting, letting his thoughts come and go without chasing them. I realized I was beginning to do the same. I wasn't forcing insights or answers. I was just letting them arise naturally. I wrote in the notebook that evening, "Solitude is not a place you run to. It's a place you return to. It's the quiet inside you that remains, even when the world gets loud again." Writing those words felt cathartic, like I was beginning to articulate the shift happening within me. I wasn't running from my pain anymore. I was inviting it in, sitting with it, listening to what it had to say. That night, I didn't dream of my father. I didn't feel haunted or restless. I just slept a deep, full sleep that felt like an embrace. The next morning, I woke with a clarity I hadn't felt in years. I stepped outside, breathing in the fresh, cool air, and I knew that I wasn't just learning to be alone, I was learning to be whole. It was a strange realization how being here, in this place that once felt heavy with memories, was now becoming a sanctuary. I didn't feel like I was chasing something anymore. I was allowing it to find me. I thought about heading back to the city, but I knew I wasn't ready yet. There was still something unfinished. I didn't know exactly what it was, but I could feel it, the need to honor this solitude, to understand not just my father, but myself. Later that day, as I was gathering firewood, I found another small box tucked under the porch steps. It was weathered and covered in dirt. Inside was a folded piece of paper letter, written in my father's neat, careful script. If you're reading this, it means you came here looking for something, maybe answers, maybe peace. Whatever it is, know that it's already inside you. Sometimes we look for things outside ourselves because facing the truth feels too hard. But in the end, it's not the world we're fighting, it's our own resistance. I sat on the porch steps, holding the letter, my throat tight. I had spent so many years blaming him for being distant, for not showing me how to deal with life's challenges. But maybe he had been trying, in his own quiet way, to pass down the strength he had fought so hard to find. I didn't cry, I just sat there, feeling the warmth of the morning sun on my face, the letter clutched in my hand. I whispered, "I get it now, Dad. I get why you needed this place. I think I needed it too." And with that, I felt a sense of calm, a kind of peace that didn't erase the pain but made it bearable. I knew I wasn't done learning, but I was ready to keep listening. The cabin, once a symbol of isolation, had become a space of acceptance. I wasn't running from myself anymore. I was learning to live with the quiet, to let it teach me what I had been too afraid to face. The morning after finding that letter, I woke up feeling different. Not lighter exactly, but more settled, like the ground beneath me had finally stopped shifting. I stayed in bed for a while, just listening to the world waking up outside the cabin. A soft breeze stirred the leaves, and the sun filtered in through the small window, casting patterns on the wooden floor. I kept thinking about my father's words. If you're reading this, it means you came here looking for something, maybe answers, maybe peace. Whatever it is, know that it's already inside you. I wondered how long it had taken him to realize that. How many years of wrestling with his own thoughts before he could put them into words like that. I couldn't help but feel a sense of gratitude both for finding the letter and for finally allowing myself to listen. I got up, made a cup of coffee, and wandered out to the porch. The lake shimmered in the morning light, and for the first time since arriving, I didn't feel uneasy being alone. Instead, I felt rooted, like I was finally present, not just physically, but mentally and emotionally too. As I sat there, an idea started forming in my mind. It wasn't fully shaped yet, just a glimmer of something. I thought about my father's solitude, how he had come here not to escape the world, but to face himself. I wondered how many other people were out there, struggling with the same need for quiet, for reflection. People like me, who didn't realize how much they needed solitude until it hit them like a wave. That thought didn't leave me. It stayed with me through breakfast, through my walk along the lakeshore, through the afternoon when I sat carving a small wooden figure at the old workbench. My father had used this space to create, to reflect, to find himself. And maybe, just maybe, that was part of his legacy, showing me that solitude could be transformative. Suddenly, I knew what I wanted to do. I couldn't just leave this place behind, not now that it had started to mean something more than just a reminder of my father's absence. I wanted to turn the cabin into a retreat, a place where people could come to disconnect, to confront their own silences, just as I had. The idea took root quickly, growing more vivid with each passing minute. I could picture it, a small, welcoming space where people could write, meditate, or just sit by the lake in their own company. A place to remember who they were before life's noise drowned them out. That evening, I sat by the fire, the old notebook open on my lap. I wrote down everything I had been thinking, how solitude had scared me at first, how I had blamed my father for not being the kind of man I thought he should be, and how, through this journey, I had started to see him differently. I wrote about forgiveness not just of him, but of myself. I had held onto so much resentment without realizing how it had shaped me. I blamed him for being distant, but in reality, I had been the one keeping a distance, refusing to understand. I wrote until my hand cramped, and then I just sat there, the fire crackling softly in the background. I could almost feel his presence calm, steady, unspoken. It wasn't about making amends with the past. It was about seeing it clearly without the fog of anger or regret. The next morning I called my friend Luke. He was the practical one, the guy who always knew how to turn ideas into reality. I hadn't talked to him since I left the city, and his voice on the other end sounded surprised. "Ethan, man, where have you been?" I smiled, looking out at the lake. "I'm at my dad's cabin," I said. "Been sorting some things out." He was quiet for a moment. "Yeah, I heard about your dad. Sorry, man. You doing okay?" I took a breath. "Better now. Actually, I wanted to run something by you. I have this idea. What if I turn the cabin into a retreat? A place where people can get away from it all. You know, no phones, no noise, just peace." He laughed softly. "That sounds like something you'd come up with. You sure you're up for that?" I glanced around the cabin, feeling more certain than I had in a long time. "Yeah," I said. "I think I am." After the call, I sat down and made a list. Repairs needed, things to keep, things to change. I wanted to preserve the essence of the place me father's touch in every corner, but also make it welcoming for those who needed solitude as much as I did. As I planned, I couldn't help but think that maybe my father had left this space not just for himself, but for me too. A place to remember what mattered. A place to reconnect. In the days that followed, I worked on fixing up the cabin. I cleaned out the old shed, repainted the porch, and started carving small wooden signs to place around the property. Words like breathe, reflect, let go. It felt good to put my hands to work, to build something meaningful. One evening, while sorting through a box of old tools, I found a small wooden plaque my father had carved. It was rough, unfinished, but the words were clear. "Quiet is not empty, it's full of answers." I held it for a long time, running my fingers over the grooves. That was it. That was the heart of what I wanted to create, a space where people could discover that quiet didn't mean loneliness. It meant finding the answers that only came when you stopped looking outward and started listening inward. That night, as I sat by the fire, I knew I wasn't just building a retreat. I was building a legacy, a way to honor the journey my father had taken and the one I was just beginning. I wrote in the notebook again. Sometimes we seek peace in all the wrong places. We think it's something we can buy or earn, but peace isn't out there. It's here, in the quiet places, in the moments when we let ourselves just be. I put the notebook down, feeling a deep, unspoken gratitude, not just for the cabin, but for my father, for teaching me that solitude wasn't something to fear. It was something to embrace, to grow from, to share. In that moment, I felt the tension leave my body, replaced by a calm acceptance. I didn't need all the answers right now. I just needed to keep moving forward, one day at a time. The cabin would become a place of healing, not just for me, but for anyone who needed to find themselves again. As the fire died down, I whispered into the quiet, "Thank you, Dad, for everything." And for the first time, I didn't feel alone. I felt part of something bigger, a legacy of love, of presence, of choosing to face the silence instead of running from it. The day I decided to leave the cabin, I woke up before dawn. The air was crisp, carrying that familiar scent of pine and lake water. I made coffee and sat on the porch, letting the first light stretch over the treetops. I wasn't in a rush to pack. I wanted to savor this last morning take in every sound, every breath, and every feeling. It was strange to think how much had changed in just a few weeks. When I first arrived, the silence felt suffocating, like it was pressing in on me from all sides. Now, it felt welcoming, almost like an old friend. I wasn't afraid of being alone anymore. I wasn't running from my thoughts. I was finally at peace with them. As I sipped my coffee, I glanced at the old wooden box on the windowsill, the one with my father's note inside. I picked it up, running my fingers over the rough edges. There was a time when I resented him for retreating to this place, for choosing solitude over being with his family. Now I realized he hadn't been escaping, he had been searching, and so had I. Before leaving, I walked down to the lake one last time. The water was perfectly still, reflecting the sky like a mirror. I thought about the journey I had taken here, not just the physical journey, but the one within. I thought about my father and how I had finally come to understand him, not through his words, but through his quiet presence. I picked up a smooth, flat stone and skipped it across the water. It jumped 3 times before sinking, leaving ripples that spread outward. I couldn't help but see it as a metaphor for this experience, how a single moment of truth could ripple through your life, changing everything. As I turned to walk back, I whispered, "Thank you, Dad." It wasn't just gratitude for the cabin or the notes he left behind. It was gratitude for giving me the space to figure out who I was, without the noise and expectations that had clouded my life for so long. Back at the cabin, I packed up my things, folding my clothes with more care than usual. It felt important to leave the place as I found it simple, clean, and full of quiet energy. Before locking up, I left a note on the old wooden desk. To whoever finds this place next, don't be afraid of the silence. It has a way of showing you who you really are. I tucked the note inside the wooden box and left it on the windowsill. Maybe someday someone else would come here seeking the same solace I did. Maybe they would find their own answers, just as I had. The drive back to the city felt different than the drive out. The world looked brighter, sharper, as if I was noticing things for the first time. I didn't feel the urge to check my phone or scroll through social media. I wasn't in a hurry to fill the silence. Instead, I let my thoughts wander, reflecting on the lessons I had learned. When I reached the outskirts of the city, I felt a strange tension in my chest. Part of me worried that the calm I found at the cabin would vanish as soon as I stepped back into my old life. But I knew that was fear, talking the same fear that had kept me from facing my own thoughts in the first place. I took a deep breath and reminded myself that solitude wasn't tied to a place. It was something I could carry with me, a state of being. When I got back to my apartment, everything felt different. The familiar noise of the city didn't overwhelm me like it used to. I didn't rush to turn on the television or call anyone. Instead, I unpacked slowly, placing the few things I had brought back with me in their places. I put the Rumi book on the bedside table, the words still echoing in my mind. Quiet is not empty, it's full of answers. That night, I sat by the window with a cup of tea, watching the lights of the city. I thought about how much I had changed. It wasn't that I had become a completely different person. It was more like I had peeled away the layers I'd built around myself, layers of fear, resentment, and denial. What was left felt real, uncomplicated, and true. I didn't feel the need to rush back to work or dive into social obligations. Instead, I made a plan, small steps to integrate what I had learned. Mornings would be quiet, no screens, just time to sit, reflect, and breathe. I would keep writing, just like I did at the cabin, letting my thoughts spill out without judgment. And I would reach out to Pia Planat out of obligation, but with genuine intention. A few days later, I met up with Luke. We grabbed coffee at our usual spot, and he could tell right away that something had shifted. "You look different," he said, raising an eyebrow. I smiled. "Yeah, I get different too." He leaned back, curious. "So, how was it?" I took a moment to find the right words. "It was hard. At first, it felt like I was losing my mind. But then, I started to get it. Solitude isn't about being alone. It's about being present. It's about making peace with yourself." He nodded slowly, as if trying to process it. "Sounds intense." "It was," I said. "But it was also necessary." In the weeks that followed, I noticed how my approach to life had changed. I wasn't as reactive. When stress crept in, I didn't immediately drown it out with distractions. Instead, I let it come, sat with it, and waited for it to pass. I learned to listen more both to myself and to others. One evening, as I was sorting through some old boxes, I found a small wooden carving one of the ones my father had made. It was a simple figure of a bird in flight, its wings curved gracefully upward. I smiled, placing it on the windowsill next to the roomy book. It seemed fitting, a reminder that freedom wasn't about escaping. It was about acceptance. Looking back, I realized that solitude had taught me something I couldn't have learned any other way. It taught me that clarity doesn't come from adding more, but from stripping away what doesn't belong. It taught me that forgiveness isn't a single act, but a process zone that begins with being honest with yourself. And it taught me that presence real, grounded presences, the foundation of peace. I still think about the cabin sometimes, especially when life gets hectic. I picture the stillness of the lake, the morning light filtering through the trees. I remember the feeling of finally being okay with myself, no masks, no noise, just quiet. As I looked at the city lights from my window, I whispered to myself, quiet is not empty, it's full of answers. And with that, I knew I wasn't running anymore. I was living.